How many times has a US president or former president been assassinated or nearly assassinated, and what are the details of those incidents? In the wake of the shooting of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, I take a brief look at the previous murders of sitting or former US presidents and the attempts on their lives which came the closest to killing them. In chronological order, I will discuss the assassinations of Abraham Lincoln, James A. Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy, plus the attempts on the lives of Theodore Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and Trump. I will also look at the supposed motives behind presidential assassinations and assassination attempts, from the political to the deranged. This video will not show any injuries or gore, but I will by necessity have to discuss some details of the injuries sustained by the presidents, although I'll keep it as clinical as I can. Any images in which weapons can be seen have had those weapons blacked out in order to comply with YouTube's community guidelines. From Julius Caesar to Donald Trump, the history of political assassinations and assassination attempts covers virtually every country on Earth and every part of humanity's history. In the modern era, though, one country which has gone through a large number of highly publicized such incidents is the United States of America, which has now seen 7 of its serving or former presidents killed or nearly killed, and all as a result of gun violence. In this video, I will give you an overview of this sad and disturbing part of the US's history and ongoing experience. As there are so many, I obviously can't dive into great detail on each one, and this video should just be viewed as a starting point if you're interested in any of these incidents. If you want to know more about them, you'll need to do additional research, as each one could probably sustain a 6-part series all on its own. We begin in 1865 with President Abraham Lincoln. On the 14th of April that year, the 56-year-old Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, and the one who had seen the country through its civil war between the Confederate South and the Northern states, was attending a play at Ford's Theatre in Washington, D.C. Whilst he was sitting in his box with his wife Mary, a well-known actor named John Wilkes Booth, aged 26, who had worked in the theatre, snuck in. The President's guard wasn't at his post. And at 10:15 p.m. he shot Lincoln in the back of the head behind the left ear. The president was carried to a nearby house on 10th Street, where he died the next morning from his injuries, having never regained consciousness. Booth escaped the theatre, having stabbed 2 men who attempted to stop him, and a 12-day manhunt ensued, which ended with him being shot and killed on the 26th of April at a farm in the state of Virginia after refusing to surrender. His co-conspirators, who were supposed to kill the Vice President and the Secretary of State at almost the same time, either did not follow through on the plan, in the case of the planned attack on the VP, or failed in the case of the Secretary, who was only wounded. They were rounded up, and 4 of them were later hanged. Booth's motives were primarily political. He was a Confederate sympathizer and a racist who supported slavery and therefore hated the fact that the North had by this point essentially won the Civil War and disagreed with Lincoln's favourable treatment of former slaves. The next assassination came just 16 years later on the 2nd of July 1881 and was directed at the 20th President, James A. Garfield. Garfield had only been president for a few months when he arrived at Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. that morning, on his way to give a speech at Williams College, then go on holiday. He was easy to track as his movements had been published in newspapers ahead of time. He had no security, as was normal for the time period, and was only accompanied by his 2 sons and the Secretaries of State and War, who were there to see him off on his trip. Little did they know that 39-year-old field journalist and former cult member Charles Julius Guiteau was waiting for the president. When Garfield entered the station's waiting area, Guiteau, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I don't know, came up behind him and shot him twice. 1 bullet grazing his shoulder, the second doing much more damage as it hit him in his back and lodged behind his pancreas. He was taken upstairs in the train station at first, then back to the White House, where at first he seemed to be on the path to recovery, though the doctors could not locate and remove the bullet. Their probing of his wounds may have led to infection, and after a miserable summer in pain, the president was moved to Elberon on the 6th of September to see if a change of air would help him. However, he finally succumbed to the results of his injuries and all the infections they had caused on the 19th of September. Had he been alive even just a few decades later, when medicine and doctors' general understanding about the need for cleanliness was more advanced, he likely would have survived. His killer had been arrested at the train station right after the attack, then incarcerated and charged with attempted murder, then murder. It was almost immediately clear that he was not of sound mind. His so-called motive had been that he thought he had helped Garfield win the election thanks to a semi-incoherent speech he wrote, initially intended to be in support of another presidential candidate during the same recent election, the former President Ulysses Grant, and which he had printed and distributed in small numbers. He was enraged when what he saw as his decisive efforts in the election were not recognised by Garfield and rewarded with a diplomatic post. He also claimed that God had told him to kill the president. It was evident during the trial, which began in November 1881, that he was highly unstable, especially given his erratic behaviour during the proceedings, which included screaming profanities at the judge, jury, and pretty much everyone else present, presenting his testimony in the form of epic poems, and his belief that he was going to be found not guilty and ultimately run for president himself. Doctors then and later have suggested possible diagnoses ranging from neurosyphilis to psychopathy, schizophrenia, and/or narcissism. Nevertheless, the prosecution argued that he was of sound mind, and he was found guilty on the 25th of January 1882 and executed by hanging on the 30th of June that same year. Moving forwards in time to 1901, we come to the assassination of the 25th President, William McKinley, then aged 58 years old. This took place in Buffalo, New York, at the Pan American Exposition, which was a huge fair, a little after 4 p.m. on the 6th of September. The president was in a building created for the fair called the Temple of Music, conducting a walkabout with members of the public. This photo of him entering was taken just minutes before the incident. Now, he did have security, but it was very light compared to what exists in modern times. In the line of people waiting to meet and shake hands with him was a 28-year-old man named Leon Czolgosz, who I'm just going to call Leon from here on out because, again, I'm not sure I'm saying his surname correctly. He was a former factory worker and self-proclaimed anarchist. When the president reached him and stretched out his hand, Leon smacked it away and shot McKinley twice in the stomach with a gun he had hidden in a handkerchief in his other hand. Though one bullet ricocheted off a button, which I find incredible, by the way, that a button could deflect a bullet, the other pierced the president's abdomen. The assassin was only prevented from taking a third shot when onlookers tackled him. The president was taken to a nearby hospital and surgeons brought in to try to save him. They couldn't locate the bullet, however, and so left it in place and stitched up the wounds. He was then removed to the home of John G. Milburn, the president of the Pan American Exposition Company, with whom he had stayed the night before. He initially seemed to be improving, but gangrene set in and eventually killed him in the early hours of the 14th of September. The bullet was never located, even after an autopsy. His killer was almost beaten to death in the immediate aftermath of the attack, but survived to be put on trial on the 24th of September. He was found guilty of the murder and executed on the 29th of October in the electric chair. His last words were, "I killed the president because he was the enemy of the good people, the good working people," indicating a political motive perhaps exacerbated by his own disappointments in life. In a gruesome little coda, he was buried in the prison grounds and sulfuric acid was poured over his body so that it was destroyed in a matter of hours. It was only after McKinley's death that Secret Service protection became routine for presidents. Before I move on to the next incident, if you're finding this video interesting and would like to hear more from me, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel with the notification bell switched on. If you go to my website, historycallingofficial.com, you can also join my mailing list and get a free download with 5 quick and easy tips for spotting good history versus bad before you buy or start reading a book. Other places you can find me on the web include my Patreon site, where I share extra bonus material every week. This week, for instance, my time traveller and historical figure patrons will be getting a look at some of the pictures I can't show here on YouTube due to the platform's community guidelines. I also have an Amazon storefront where I've put together lists of history-themed books, movies, TV shows and gifts for you to peruse. Both are linked below for you, as is my Instagram page. Thank you too to those of you who donate to the channel using the thanks button under videos, as this is very kind and much appreciated. McKinley was succeeded by Theodore Roosevelt, who served as president until 1909. 3.5 years later, in 1912, in an incident which bears some striking similarities to that which befell Trump in 2024, he was campaigning to get the job once again, because there was no two-term limit at that point, when he was almost assassinated. It was the 14th of October, and the 53-year-old Roosevelt was campaigning in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Having just had dinner here at the Gilpatrick Hotel in the city, he left in order to deliver a speech elsewhere, and as he was waving to crowds from this open-top car, a detail which has shades of JFK's death, which we'll get to shortly, he was shot by a 36-year-old former saloon keeper named John Schrank. The bullet struck the former president in the chest, but remarkably, his steel glasses case and his 50-page speech slowed it sufficiently so that, although it penetrated his body, it did not reach his lung. Even more remarkable was the manner in which Roosevelt reacted, for he was one very cool customer. He stood up and told an aide that he had merely been pinked, not a word I'm familiar with in this context, but having looked it up, it basically means nicked by the bullet. He smiled, lifted his hat off to the crowd to reassure them, told them he was all right, and instructed them not to kill Schrank, which they were on the point of doing once the man had been disarmed. He instead had his would-be killer brought up to him, asked him why he'd done what he'd done, and when he got no response, turned him over to the police. Deducing that his lung remained intact because he wasn't spitting up blood, he then went on to give his scheduled speech, famously telling the crowd that it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. The blood was seeping through his shirt the whole time, but only after he was done did he agree to go to the hospital. When he was finally examined by doctors, they discovered the bullet lodged in his chest muscle, as you can see in this remarkable X-ray, and opted not to remove it. It remained there for the rest of Roosevelt's life, and he died in 1919, having not retaken the White House, if you're interested. As for Schrank, he initially claimed he wanted to prevent Roosevelt's third term, but he was soon certified insane, having claimed that President McKinley's ghost ordered him to kill Theodore Roosevelt. In fact, a document he wrote in which he described that dream can be seen here, dated the 15th of September 1901, a month before the attack. It says, "To the people of the United States, September 15th, 1901, 1:30 a.m., in a dream I saw President McKinley sit up in his coffin, pointing at a man in a monk's attire in whom I recognized Theodore Roosevelt. The dead president said, 'This is my murderer, avenge my death.'" Schrank was incarcerated in the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Waupun, Wisconsin, and died there in 1943. Now we come to what is indisputably the most famous presidential assassination of all time, that of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, which took place on the 22nd of November 1963. He was also on the campaign trail, and at the time of his shooting, at about 12:30 p.m. that afternoon, was riding through the city streets, waving to the crowds of people who had gathered to see him from this motorcade. He was in an open-top car on a route which had been published in advance. Sitting next to him was his wife Jackie. Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie were in front of them, with a driver in front of them. What happened next has been the subject of great dispute in the years since, so I can only tell you what I think occurred, and I accept that a lot of you will have different opinions. Just don't be rude about it in the comments, please. Personally, I think that as the motorcade drove down Elm Street, the president was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald from this 6th floor window in the nearby Texas School Book Depository, where he was then working. This mock-up of the assassination scene shows his line of sight to the president's vehicle. while this photo shows the real-life view from the window down to the street where JFK was fatally injured. Oswald was a 24-year-old ex-Marine who had at one time defected to Russia. The president was hit twice, one bullet going through his neck and the other doing massive damage to the right side of his head. Though his heart was still beating when he arrived at Parkland Memorial Hospital a few minutes later, he died soon after at 1 p.m. Governor Connolly was also injured, but recovered. Oswald fled the scene, went home, got a handgun, and then left his residence again. When police officer J.D. Tippett saw him walking by at 1:12 p.m. and called him over to his patrol car to speak with him, Oswald murdered him by shooting him 3 times in the chest and once in the head. He then calmly walked away and snuck into a movie theatre where he was arrested by police, having drawn his gun on them as well, pointed it at one of the officers and pulled the trigger. It was only the fact that the gun didn't go off that saved the man. Oswald denied having killed the president and Officer Tippett over the 2 days he was questioned at Dallas Police Headquarters, and was then shot himself on live TV by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, while he was being transferred from one jail to another. He died soon afterwards in the same hospital that Kennedy had expired in. Jack Ruby later died in prison. Conspiracy theories that a look-alike had been buried in Oswald's place were disproven when he was exhumed in 1981 and dental records proved that the corpse was his. Oswald's motives appear to have been political and narcissistic. He was essentially a loser who could barely hold a job and who wanted attention. The Russians weren't terribly interested in him though, and didn't give him the kind of easy lifestyle, fame, money and recognition he'd expected. Plus, as he wrote himself, he found life boring in the Soviet Union. As there was nothing special about him on his own, I think he determined to try to make it into the history books by forcing his way into the legacy of someone much more important. He tried and failed to assassinate retired US Major General Edwin Walker on the 10th of April 1963, and then discovered he'd have a much more high-profile target when Kennedy's visit to Dallas was announced. While I do think it's possible there was a cover-up regarding some aspects of how the Secret Service handled themselves on that final fateful trip to Dallas, especially because the president's brain went missing after a chaotic autopsy, I've never personally had any doubt that Oswald did this. If you're interested in learning more about that day, you might want to watch my video on the famous pink suit Jackie Kennedy was wearing and what happened to it afterwards. I'll leave it linked on screen and below for you. Now we come to the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan, which took place in Washington, D.C. on the 30th of March 1981, barely 2 months after his inauguration. As he was walking from the Washington Hilton Hotel, where he had just given a speech, to his limo, and just moments after this picture was taken, he was shot by a 25-year-old man named John Hinckley Jr., who was mingling with the rest of the unchecked crowd who had gathered to see the president. The bullet, having bounced off the door of his car, hit Reagan in the chest, causing critical damage. Several members of his entourage were also very seriously injured from other bullets, and one, Press Secretary James Brady, would ultimately die of his injuries in 2014. His death was ruled homicide despite the amount of time that had elapsed since his injury occurred. In the first moments after the shooting, the president's aides didn't realise he'd been hit, but when he started coughing up blood from a partially collapsed lung, he was rushed to George Washington University Hospital, where he actually walked in, no stretchers were available, before collapsing. He nearly died, and I think had he been shot a few decades earlier, as some of the other presidents were, he certainly would have. But doctors were able to operate, remove the bullet, repair the damage, and save his life. He left hospital on the 11th of April, and as you can see from this later image of him, got back to work in the Oval Office, made a full recovery, and was able to continue on as president. Hinckley was arrested at the scene and, when asked about his motives, said that he had shot the president in an attempt to impress actress Jodie Foster, who he was obsessed with and who he had been stalking. She was then just 18 years old, and the incident caused serious upheaval to her life for quite some time afterwards. On the 21st of June 1982, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to St Elizabeth's Hospital, from where he was released in 2016. Make of that what you will, but I don't think I would have let him out. That brings us to the most recent incident and the one which led to me making this video. On the 13th of July 2024, former US President Donald Trump was injured in an assassination attempt while speaking at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Trump suffered a minor injury to his ear when the bullet grazed him and was very lucky not to die. One spectator was killed and 2 others seriously injured. The assailant was 20-year-old kitchen worker Thomas Crooks, who shot the president from the roof of a nearby building and who was killed within moments by Secret Service snipers. At the time of creating this video, no motive for the attack has been ascertained, and there are questions about how the killer was able to access a rooftop so close to Trump's position unhindered and commit his crimes despite warnings from civilians on the ground for a couple of minutes leading up to the shooting. So what are the common threads between these 7 incidents? Well, as I said at the start, they were all the result of gun violence. They were also all carried out by men and were only possible due to lapses in security around the presidents, or indeed a near total lack of security in the early days. Motives vary, but mental illness and political disagreements with the president's policies, or with the American way of life in general, are the 2 recurring themes. Now, of course, similar incidents do unfortunately happen in other first world countries, but I'm not aware of any such country that has the kind of tragic, modern-era record in this field that the United States does. I haven't even had time to touch on any of the attacks on various presidents which didn't lead to any injuries to those men. However, there are a lot of them, as a quick Google search will show you. Thank you for watching this summary of the very grim phenomenon of presidential assassinations or attempted assassinations in the United States. Something I realised in putting this video together is that not all such crimes are remembered equally. While the murders of Presidents Lincoln and Kennedy are seared into the public consciousness, I knew almost nothing about what happened to Garfield or McKinley before researching this, and I wasn't even aware of the attempt on Roosevelt. Possibly this is because I'm not American, but my question of the week is, why do you think attacks on some presidents are remembered so much more than attacks on others? Let me know in the comments below, and if you'd like to learn more about American history or other famous murders, try one of these videos next. I'll be back next time, and until then, keep learning.